Hello. You know, there are few more heartbreaking sights for Australians who've lived on the land than the devastation of dryland salinity. Because on the one hand, productive agriculture is what's built so much of what we love about rural Australia. But on the other hand, agriculture as it's been practiced to date creates the conditions for the disaster that's unfolding across so much of this country. Australia's grain growers stand to lose more than most from salinity, and naturally stand to gain more than most from profitable and productive solutions. Through the Grains Research and Development Corporation, grain growers and the federal government are investing in research to develop such solutions, farming systems, technology and biology which farmers will adopt because not only are they good for the environment, but they make money. This video looks at 3 of those research projects. It's one of the strange contradictions of Australian agriculture that in this driest of habitable continents, the greatest long-term threat to agriculture comes not from a shortage, but a surplus of water. If we are to halt salinity, we need to reduce the amount of rainwater which passes through the soil's root zone unused by crops and evaporation. One way of increasing the amount of water that's taken up by a cropping system from the soil is to introduce a perennial pastures phase to the rotation. And about the most broadly promising pasture species in that regard is this stuff, lucerne, or alfalfa as the sandwich makers call it. Lucerne is as thirsty as a flathead in the Simpson Desert. It's got an incredible capacity to suck up water from the soil and turn it into stems and leaves. To do that, it has the most amazing root system, commonly reaching to 3, 4 and 5 metres in depth, anecdotally to as much as 15 metres. So while annual crops must use rainwater while it's still in the top 60 to 90 centimetres of soil, it has to go a lot further than that to get out of lucerne's reach.
Well, I think we're looking at lucerne in this situation as the most versatile perennial species we've got to use water at the right time of year to dry the soil out so that we can continue growing profitable crops without the unacceptable leakage below the root zone that we have in an essentially annual system.
Working with a group of grain growers from the New South Wales-Victoria border region, Dr Anna Ridley from Victorian NRE's Rutherglen Research Institute had found that phases of lucerne in rotation with grain crops was more effective at drying the soil profile than the alternative of alley farming. But how long should the lucerne phase be? And how many grain crops before the soil begins to wet up again and needs to come back to lucerne?
We knew that we could not get much leakage under lucerne, but the cropping part of the enterprise is still the most profitable. So what we were trying to do was to design the environmentally optimal farming system. Farmers who loved lucerne and grew lucerne tended to grow long periods of lucerne, 5 to 7 years of lucerne, then followed by long periods of cropping. What we found was that you only needed 2 to 3 years of lucerne before it had done its job in terms of drying out the soil. And that in this environment, about 600 millimetres rainfall, you can get 2 to 3, sometimes 4 crops after that 2 or 3 years of lucerne without leakage. So we want to incorporate the minimum amount of lucerne and the maximum amount of crop, but still not get any leakage.
Today, farmers have available a fairly simple calculation based on that work to customise a rotation plan for their own situation.
They assess their soil type, is it medium, light or heavy? They just keep their rainfall records. May to August is the critical period. They know what plant they've got growing on the particular paddock, and using those, knowing the plant type, the soil type and the rainfall, they can calculate their leakage, and they can then also go on to calculate how many crops they can get before they get leakage after lucerne. And what we've found is that in the lower rainfall areas, you might be able to get 4 or 5 crops after 2 or 3 years of lucerne, whereas these higher rainfall areas, you might only get 2 or 3. So it's enabling farmers to tailor the research results onto their own farm in a practical sense, so that they can develop what is their environmental and profit optimum.
But a group of farmers from the Corowa region in New South Wales is taking the research the next step to work out how best to manage lucerne for the twin objectives of drying the soil profile and profit.
The management is the key. Like, the message is out to grow lucerne, but it's the management of it.
Dr Jeff Hirth, also from the Rutherglen Research Institute, is in charge of this research. Together, the researchers and the farmers want to answer 2 questions. What is the minimum lucerne plant density to dry out the soil profile? How hard can it be grazed by livestock without compromising lucerne's water use benefits?
We've got 5 grazing treatments, and we've got a range of lucerne plant densities ranging from 3 to 36 plants per square metre. We're doing quite detailed measurements of soil water, and we're doing those every fortnight down to 3 metres, and we do them down to 5 metres every quarter, and that just ensures that we get to the depth of the lucerne roots, because we can really identify how deep lucerne roots have gone on the water extraction patterns. That's building up a picture which allows us to see over the growing season, when it rains, when they are grazed, as to how lucerne's capability of keeping that soil profile dry changes with the season and with the grazing practices. We're also doing quite detailed root measurements, and we look down a perspex tube and we count roots, and we go back every fortnight and look at that same part of that clear plastic tube and just see what the turnover of roots is, whether it's based on where the moisture is in the profile or what the impact of grazing might be on root turnover. And that helps us to fill in the picture about the root growth story with lucerne, and helping modellers to understand which parts of the root system grow at what times of the year, and completing that modelling picture. We take quite detailed meteorological measurements. We're able to measure, we have a direct measure of the amount of water that's being transpired through the leaves of lucerne during the day. We also take quite detailed livestock measurements, as well as measurements about the amount of lucerne dry matter that's available, and some measures of leaf area, as well as density measurements.
While this research is answering questions that are of particular interest to grain growers in this area, they're questions that need to be answered across a big proportion of pretty much the whole Australian grain zone, and that's not lost on Jeff Hirth.
We are working very closely with modellers, and they will take a lot of the data that we've collected to improve their models for lucerne, and they will certainly be able to use those models to predict how well the different rotations and different grazing management practices that we recommend will fit in different climates and different soil types. The application of these results will be across the whole Australian grain belt.
Right from the very start, though, this project has been carried out in consultation with farmers, a relevance check at the very core of this research.
Jeff's got a focus group of farmers that he can rely on and go back to, and I think you would say use them quite a bit. And from that point of view, he's been able to develop this project more to suit the needs of the farming community or the farmers in this area.
I'm not a practitioner. I'm not out there growing grain and managing lucerne, and there is a wealth of experience and knowledge out there, and it's valuable and important to go out and really tap into that.
While it is clear that lucerne will be an important part of many productive solutions to dryland salinity, there's a project underway here in Western Australia trialling a host of other perennial pastures to give grain growers options other than lucerne. Despite lucerne's undisputed usefulness, there are conditions in which it's not a great performer, acid soils particularly, of which this country has plenty. Besides, to put all your eggs in the one basket is dangerous. In fact, the Australian lucerne industry was devastated 20 years ago by 2 species of aphids. The hunt for alternatives started in earnest 3 years ago with what Jeff Moore from Western Australian Department of Agriculture describes as a bare cupboard.
So over the first 2 years, 99 and 2000, we've grown out about 600 lines of alternative perennial legumes and more than 50 species. And from that, we've developed a short list of species that look like they've got reasonable potential, which we're then progressing further. So initially, we acquired the seed in small packets from genetic resource centres or basic seed banks, and they might give us half to 1 gram or even sometimes only 30 seeds, which obviously we have to bulk up.
After 3 years, the short list of perennial pasture legume species is down to 6, and the selection and breeding work concentrates on getting the best lines within those species.
Here we have what we're calling our selection area. It's the first year we've done it, and for the 6 promising species that we've shortlisted, we've picked the elite lines from those, and we're growing them out in large rows with 130 plants in each row, and within that we're selecting for particular traits.
It's work that is already gathering a lot of interest from farmers. Field days at the main small plot and selection trial site south of Perth are proof that grain growers want to get their hands on some of these plants as soon as they're available as commercial varieties. Helped, of course, by the fact that a few of them are clearly vigorous perennials. But no matter how vigorously a plant grows, if it's going to be of any economic use, it's got to have good feed value. Evaluation of feed value is being undertaken by scientists from CSIRO.
In terms of feeding value, we're looking for a plant that is going to be productive to the animal. It means the animal has to want to eat it, and once it's eaten it, it must provide the nutrients the animal needs to grow, to produce meat, to produce wool. In terms of quality for animals, there are a number of species here which could rival lucerne. A plant like this Sula in front of us has consistently high digestibility, so shows real promise as an animal feed. Protein is another that we consider. Generally, the legumes protein is in an abundance and in fact more than the animal can utilise. Then we move to things like tannins, which are both beneficial when they're in very low quantities. They will reduce the incidence of bloat. They will assist the animal in using its protein, but over about 5% tannin, we actually get a reduction in feed intake, and so it becomes a negative to the animal and it's an anti-nutritional factor.
A successful legume is one that is matched with the right rhizobium bacteria. That's the microbe that works with the roots to supply it the nitrogen it can use. Here at Murdoch University, the painstaking research is on for the right rhizobium for Jeff Moore's most promising plants.
Our soils have very little nitrogen. They also have very few rhizobia adapted to exotic perennial legumes. So if we're going to introduce legumes from around the world into Australian soils, 9 times out of 10 we have to introduce the right strain of rhizobia with them. Even if we've got a perennial clover, it'll use a different rhizobium to an annual clover. And so although our collection has an enormous number of strains for annual legumes, only about 10% of that collection represents strains for perennial legumes. And so we are quite rapidly trying to increase that number of strains for perennial legumes.
The work is not confined to legumes. Perennial grasses are being trialled as well, though the soil nutrition benefits of legumes are a clear attraction. What's required, though, is a range of options for different situations. Ultimately, whatever tools science comes up with for managing water in the soil profile, they'll need to be properly adapted for the areas in which they're to be used. Now, sometimes that'll be fairly simple, but some areas provide particular challenges that require specific attention. In the Bland region of southern New South Wales, the combination of waterlogging in cracking clay soils with salt often barely half a metre below the surface makes for a challenging environment to farm profitably and sustainably.
So this is very typical of the soil of this area. So start with 30% clay, and then it just become heavier with depth. So that's why the soil is sort of poorly drained.
Yeah.
Here at the moment, we don't know the full story. What we find that is actually, in a lot of cases, we will see salt accumulate in a profile at varying depth. And the closest we found is actually about 40 centimeter. We can't see the salt here, but actually there's salt there.
For years, farmers have been hamstrung by waterlogged soils. It means a severely restricted period available to sow a crop and frequently loss of yield.
It is difficult to manage, and the biggest problem is we still have the dry droughts, but we have this additional experience of what's locally referred to as a wet drought. And that's a year in which we experience significant waterlogging events. Now, that might be season-long waterlogging, or it might be just a short period of waterlogging which restricts the potential of a wheat crop, or any other crop specifically, to give its ultimate yield. So you're actually not using the resources you've got.
There's a range of research happening in this area, coordinated and aimed at developing a menu of techniques to make these farmers more profitable, while ensuring that salt below the surface doesn't move any closer.
I mean, one of the aims of our project is to try and evaluate a range of potential strategies, potential solutions, and to try and develop best management practice for this local area, and the same sort of soil types that have these waterlogging problems.
The researchers have been evaluating chemical solutions, specifically gypsum.
Gypsum is actually calcium sulfate. So what it does do is actually you replace the sodium. And also by replacing sodium, you reduce the dispersion of the soil. And also gypsum have another effect, which is more immediate effect, is actually improve the flocculation of the clay. So as a result, it will improve infiltration.
They've been evaluating biological solutions too, particularly how to use different pasture species to penetrate the soil structure opened up by gypsum.
Yeah, well, what we're hoping is that by using gypsum, we'll get a short-term relief and improvement in soil structure and drainage, but in the longer term, to come up with a group of deep-rooted perennial plants that can improve soil structure by creating what we call biopores, that when the roots die, they leave a pore there which the water can drain down and generally improve the structure of these soils. From the pastures perspective, there's two objectives. Obviously, we have to find a plant that produces good quality feed for livestock, but secondly, it's this soil amelioration that we want. And so the plants need to be able to improve soil structure, and not all plants can do that as effectively.
Dr. Mark Peoples from CSIRO Plant Industries is also evaluating lucerne phase rotations on part of Peter Allen's farm.
Well, this is the remnants of a lucerne pasture that Peter had here for some time. And about 3 years ago we commenced cropping, and we've been expanding the areas of both crop to canola and wheat over the last 3 years. So this crop just here is first crop after lucerne, alongside its 2 and 3 years after lucerne. So we're looking at how long the dewatering benefits, the lucerne drying out the soil profile, how long that lasts down the profile, both in the topsoil where we have problems with waterlogging, but also deeper in the profile where you might get water leaking down to groundwater into the water table, and maybe problems with rising water tables. So we're looking at managing water in these systems with lucerne and seeing how long the effect lasts.
The research will also incorporate results from commercial trials of raised bed farming, controlled traffic and grazing management to minimise physical compaction of the soil by livestock. It's work that, while specifically tailored for this region, will have far wider application.
There are other soils that also suffer waterlogging further south, down to the Victorian border, and a lot of this work will apply down there, although in some cases the pH is different, so we may need to use different plants. But if we can prove the principle on these soils, then we hope to extrapolate it to these other locations.
One of the striking features of the research is the extent to which farmers are involved. They pushed for it in the first place. It's on their land that the trials are taking place, and in fact they're as much a part of the team as the scientists themselves.
So basically we've contacted GRDC and other researchers through the New South Wales Department of Ag, and basically through our New South Wales Agricultural Bureau in Temora and through land care groups, and attracted them to the district and tried to encourage them to come here and do the research. And since we've had them here, it's been great. They've sort of got in and we've directed and been in close association with the research and setting up the trials. And
the farmers are key to the success of the project. Because there wasn't much research in this area before, we were very enthusiastically greeted and welcomed to the area, and they've been our most vigorous supporters. And there's nothing like having the local farmers promote the information that you gather, and in fact they've been our best extension agents, as it were.
It's clear from the depth of research around this country right now that salinity is a problem beyond quick fixes.
There's no simple answer to a question as complex as salinity. So what we're doing is looking at developing farming systems and profitable farming systems at that. One of the things is that the wheat belt is one of the areas that are most affected by salinity, and we don't want wheat growers to stop growing wheat.
There's also clearly a great deal more optimism today about stopping salinity in its tracks than there was in the mid to late 90s.
These 3 projects are just a sample of the research being funded by grain growers and the federal government through the Grains Research and Development Corporation. There's enormous promise here and a lot of hope that farmers will indeed be able to arrest the rise of dryland salinity, because they've got ways to do it that are practical, sustainable and profitable. That's a great outcome. Good for farmers, good for the environment and good for Australia.